Hello. Oh, that's so nice. I teach college students and they never respond. That's amazing. Thank you. Hello, and good afternoon, evening. Welcome to the Climate Series Talk, Cultural Food Adaptation. My name is Trygve Throntfight. None of you have to remember that. And I am Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Minnesota Humanities Center, which is proud to sponsor this talk. I'm also personally excited to welcome you to the Great Northern Festival. Every year, the Great Northern shares dozens of performances, art installations, outdoor activations, and solutions-focused climate talks during the last week of January and the first week of February that invigorate mind and body. And speaking of the latter, do be sure to visit Fika downstairs. I'm told the soup is excellent tonight. Our panelists maybe can expand on that. Before going any further, we at MHC, the Great Northern, and the American Swedish Institute wish to acknowledge the Dakota peoples on whose land we meet. We thank them for their ongoing care of the land and appreciate their connections to this community and the richness and diversity of their culture. In this spirit, and in recognition of the growing diversity of this neighborhood, we also wish to thank all of you for coming here and for being part of the American Swedish Institute's mission to serve as a gathering place for all people. On behalf of the Great Northern, I want to thank the festival's Climate Series sponsors, the McKnight Foundation, Minneapolis Foundation, Askoff Finlayson, Polestar Minneapolis, and the Carlson Family Foundation for their support of these important conversations, in addition to the many other organizations and individuals that contribute to the festival annually. If you would like to support the Great Northern's ability to bring you this free programming, please consider making a donation at the Great Northern website, thegreatnorthernfestival.com. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Jovan C. Speller, Gabrielle E. W. Carter, and our moderator, Erin Sharkey. Jovan is a multidisciplinary artist, archivist, and radical homesteader based in rural Minnesota. Her artwork, which primarily evolves from her photography practice, interprets historical narrative through contemporary discourse. Her research-based practice is centered around elevating, complicating, and inventing stories that capture ancestry, engage legacy, and reimagine liberation. Her works are rooted in a practice of permacultural design through intentional observation and integration. Gabrielle Etienne is a cultural preservationist and multidisciplinary artist who uses diasporic and local food as a vehicle to reimagine wealth, marginalized food systems, and inheritance. Her work uses oral history, cooking, textile, and agriculture to engage audiences and create contemporary source materials and points of access for those disconnected from ancestral land and traditions. Her current project, The Seeds We Keep, is a short film commissioned by Oxford American that explores questions that ground her work and explore her rural imagination. Finally, Erin is a cultural producer, writer, arts and abolition organizer, and cultural worker based in Minneapolis on Dakota land. She is the co-founder with Janata Petras of an experimental production collective called Free Black Dirt, and a steward of the Fields at Root Springs, a retreat and respite place centering BIPOC and LGBTQ plus folks in central Minnesota. She's just finished editing A Darker Wilderness, Black Nature Writing from Soil to Stars, a collection due in February from Milkweed Editions and from which she will be reading on February 2nd at Open Book in the Loft. She is also currently on the cover of Minnesota Women's Press, which is a publication my mom helped to found. So, yeah, woo woo. Please join me in welcoming Jovan, Gabrielle, and Erin.
Thank you, love. All right. Hey, y'all. It's good to see so many folks that I know and folks I don't know. We're very excited to have this conversation. I think when the three of us got together to talk about it, we almost had to stop ourselves from getting in the meat of it because there's so many things that we're excited to get in the mix with. I wonder if we could start with talking about how y'all know each other and what the role of friendship and community is in this work.
Okay, y'all, we're going to jump right in. Hey, how's everyone feeling? Yeah. In North Carolina, we don't actually have cold like this, so thank you for exposing me to this year. Wow. So community brought me here, right? I think community is really central to the work that we do in cultural preservation because a lot of our traditions are dependent on us having one another, right? I like to think of certain things like winemaking and sausage making as ways that we have to have our community around us in order to have what we need. And so I went to my first hog slaughter, or hog killing is how you say it if you're from Roxborough, North Carolina, in 2018. And what I witnessed was Mr. Mark Paler and his family preserving a very old tradition of bringing everybody in the community together. Everyone had a role, from the 10-year-old to the 80-year-old, in slaughtering, butchering, and processing the hogs for the sausage, the ham, and the other meats for the year. And so I thought that was really beautiful because it just shows you how this tradition that is largely, unfortunately, lost, right, for many reasons, is just dependent on all of us coming together to play our role and to do our part. And I feel like that's kind of, how I look at our relationship, right? We're not making sausage.
Are we though? I mean,
but actually,
we kind of are, metaphorically speaking. I think we are, but I think for me, I was witnessing all of this connectedness to community and ancestry and heritage and process and tradition, with some FOMO, and with some feelings of disconnect and feelings of I don't have that, and I attribute that for me personally to two things. One is the North, and still trying to find my way and sense of community within a colder climate, and trying to figure out how do you have these same seasonal activities? Now you're witnessing it, right? In this colder climate. And also, I'm originally from Los Angeles, and we moved every single year. And there was no rain. We learned how to stop, drop, and roll from fires, and then we learned how to hide under the table from earthquakes. So it was climate chaos from upbringing. And then we moved, and then there was social chaos. So we left LA at the same time, in the same year of the Rodney King beating, and the big earthquake, so we left right during and before those things happened. So there was always this, feeling of escaping and never having time or space to really connect with anybody or anything or any tradition. So here I am on Instagram, living my best life. And and like most folks, I learned of your work through High on the Hog. And I was like, the way that you tell stories is beautiful. It's beautiful, and I felt it deeply. And I was, at the time, looking at my ancestral land in North Carolina. Not close, but not far from where you are. And I was like, this is somebody who's doing what I was hoping to do. This is somebody who is reclaiming, and there is this generational care of land and people that's happening, And I was just like, I'm gonna just slide into her DMs. That's what I'll do. And I did. And And so I reached out with a question about growing okra in cold climates. Yeah.
If you ever want to get noticed in my DMs, ask me about okra. I will respond.
You heard it here first, people. Mm-hmm.
And is that friendship about, it's about learning together, it's about permission, it's about witnessing someone else do it that gives you the yes that we need? I think that anyway, you were about to
And curiosity. I was just going to ask curiosity. And then, kind of putting fear aside and, saying, this is a person doing really beautiful things that I'm inspired by. I can just reach out to this person and tell them that. And maybe they'll respond and maybe they won't. But, Gabrielle has an incredibly generous spirit and a practice of sharing. And I think that that's one of the things that really allowed us to cultivate this relationship and then imagine into the future together.
What about Jovan's work was attractive to you? And I'm sorry, I told you I wasn't going to do this, but I think you should talk about just what was the draw besides okra to connect.
Well, I think something we have in common is I see myself in you and I feel seen by you, right? Gonna try not to. I did a cat eye tonight just for y'all.
It's just the beginning of the talk. You can cry later.
Don't you do it either. But no, I think as someone who grew up in a rural Black community, but always wanted to live elsewhere, moved to San Francisco for college, lived in New York for most of my adult life, and was not thinking about an Apex, North Carolina. For a lot of my life, reconnecting to where I'm from is what made everything make sense. And I think I saw I was you in the sense that I was out in the world and I was doing and I was moving, but I was looking at home and I was seeing something and I knew I was missing something. And with an aging grandfather who is 86 now, with just all the stories, right? All the Bro Rabbit, all the medicinal history him and his brothers have compiled. I knew it was really up to me because no one else was really interested in the stories that they were telling and in the information and knowledge that they had. And so going back home and recording that was me reconnecting to that, and I could tell not only are you fly, not only are you in the work, right? Because she was making soap, she had goats. She's a radical homesteader. This is what she does. So I see myself and I see what I'm also yearning to continue to cultivate and conjure. And I could just tell there was this sense of reciprocity, right? It wouldn't be a one-way relationship. And I think that's also something it's become clear to me is very important to community is reciprocity. Not extractiveness, but being with people, seeing people, understanding. I think that's at the foundation of our work. So I seen you, and you seen me, honey. And that's how we got on this stage.
I love it. Thank you. So you both talked a bit about your own migrations. And I think at the heart of the Great Migration is both trauma and hope, right? It's both about possibility. And so I wonder if we could talk about the Great Migration a bit and some of the questions that we've already or some of the topics we've already sort of touched on around how those food traditions that followed us across the ocean and then up from the south to the north, and how are we navigating holding on to those traditions, adapting them to new climates, that sort of thing.
You know why I want to start? Because I just had this conversation with Janata in the green room about her family. She's first generation Trinidadian, and how she's been able to connect, living in a place like this, in a cold like this, to her heritage and her history through the food, the recipes of her mother.
And her mother's food ingredients, is it still happening? Slam it. Whenever you can go to that is it a space now? Is it a food truck? What are we doing? Whatever she's in the mood.
You have to listen close.
The best food. Ooh, I'm sorry.
Listen. Okay, we're back. Sorry. But no, like food is like the vehicle, right? It's the way in so many situations that we actually get a chance to experience our culture, because otherwise land was lost, connections were lost, family members and elders were lost in so many situations, and not everyone has the opportunity that I have to sit down with my grandfather, who's in his 80s, and hear the stories directly from his mouth, because he grew up tenant farming, you know, in North Carolina, and picking cotton and priming tobacco. That's a part of our history and our heritage, and not everyone has that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me has been, you know, it's not like those histories are implanted in your mind. I think that they're implanted in your DNA. And it's about making space to find those histories and then like discover what will manifest where you are. And that has been a learning for me, because for a long time I was really feeling like, man, like I can't believe that all of these histories are lost, that I will never know like what seeds did my ancestors bring, you know, and did they survive? Did they thrive? Like, what adaptations did they have to make, right? In order to feed themselves during, like, you know, scarcity is like the light version. And so one of the things that I've been trying to, like, settle in my soul and in my practice of living, of making, of experiencing community and interacting with other people is generally trusting that I have the information within me, and I have the ability to observe what my environment will allow, what is thriving without my intervention, you know, and where, right? Like I live 3.5 hours north of the cities, and we have 3 weeks less winter than 3 weeks more winter, so 3 weeks like less growing season than in Minneapolis. And so that was an adjustment, even though I will admit that my crops and pots on the balcony, they failed, honey. They failed utterly. I never had look, I know that we can grow anywhere, but I failed. So, I just didn't have enough sunlight, but I was like, we're gonna try it anyway. But I didn't know going into it that was not going to work out, right? Like, there were beautiful, like, leggy, you know, plants that never fruited. It's okay. That's all right. But now I do have space to play and experiment, and I do notice the areas on the property that will do well with certain things. You know, like our backyard, my husband is here, he knows, it has its own microclimate. Like, we have 3 feet of snow still left that has not melted at the end of May. You know, and we go down our driveway and make a right and look at all the farmlands, and that snow has melted and has been melted. And I look at all of my other Instagram friends in the cities that are already growing, and I'm like, how are you harvesting? Like, what did you know, so it is really like trying to understand deeply, like, what is possible where I'm at, and not being fearful of the fail, you know, and making adaptations as you go.
Yeah, and I think failure's it's part of it. I've never made a farmer laugh harder than when I introduced him as like an expert. He's like, what are you talking? That's not what, we don't do that. Yeah. It's about observation, right? It's about what you're saying, like there are microclimates in your yard. There's ways that certain places are real juicy, and we don't know. That might be hundreds of years of something decomposing in the soil right there, you know? And I also think that there's something important about remembering that we are nature too, and that we can be in sympathetic relationship with the rhythms of the place that we're in, and that like something not working is sort of kind of about it too. Mm-hmm. So I wonder about like your experiences with that sort of experimentation, those butting up against failures, or, you know, those growth edge moments, and how it's presented itself in your meals or in your work.
Oh, can I share? Okay, there's a couple. I have so many fails. It's like, which one do I want to share in this moment? Okay, there's one in particular. that I will share. So I love watermelon. I tried to grow, and I made sure to get, a variety that had the shortest that I could find. These are not plants that take a short amount of time. I think it was 90 days. And, planting in June, like starting in June. I mean, I started them inside, but still, it was a long shot to begin with. Yeah. Listen, long shot. Yeah. But and my brother was like, those ain't gonna grow. You ain't gonna get nothing, I was like, watch me. So they did, though. And I was I was texting, I was like, look. And I was like, it was like the size of my foot, and I was really excited about that. But then they were like the size of my foot for like a month and a half, and I'm like, this is not working. But we still ate them because they were sweet. It's just that they weren't red, right? And so they weren't as sweet as they could get. That wasn't like the prime of what it could be. But, my 4-year-old Silas was like, this is the best watermelon I've ever had. I'm like, I don't know how much you've heard, but thank you. We grew this, And then at the end of the season, and so, like I said, we have more winter up north. And so the frost came pretty quickly this year, and I saw it happen. I was working out outside like 5:45 in the morning. I was like, there it is. And I was like, I need to bring everything in. And so I brought in all of these unripened watermelon, and I posted on Instagram like, so are we thinking watermelon ice cream or what? Let me tell you, okay, I got so many like, are you sure that's gonna work? It worked. That watermelon,
Sis.
Go ahead, clap for it.
Sis.
That watermelon ice cream was the best thing I've had. I can't even tell. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I'm getting off a tangent.
No.
But that was beautiful. But
You're right on.
But I want to know about because Gabrielle told me about pickling rinds.
So I feel like this conversation about adaptation is really, it's also about the framework, right, and a mindset. And I feel like something that we've always used as people of the African diaspora is cleverness. We knew how to use what we have. And so even though you won't have the same season as me in North Carolina, you were able to use it to make something with it. And I feel like some of the things, I've been playing a lot with pickling and preserving. That's a whole nother, maybe that's not a whole nother conversation.
No, it's exactly.
I really love like an opportunity to take something that you think you know and turn it into something totally different, right? And so a friend of mine who is a farmer in North Carolina, Julius, he grows watermelon. He grows them well now.
I know.
That's okay, because you made that ice cream, and I am proud of you, friend. But we were playing with some of the rinds, and he did pickled watermelon rinds, right, which is a very classic, traditional foodway staple. We also do watermelon rind preserves. But we took this pickle where he used clove and ginger that he grew as well. And we played around, and I made a pickled watermelon rind pie. And when I tell you the feeling, I felt my ancestors clapping for me, because you think about when you have nothing else in your pantry but some flour and some butter and some salt and some pickles, but you can make a pie, you can make a meal.
Yep.
There was something about that was so liberating, and that to me is what speaks to like why we are who we are. We are the original adapters anyway. We brought our foods here. The Eddos, the pigeon peas, the field peas, the okra, that was all the stuff that we brought to the New World and adapted it to a whole new climate anyway. So we are the original adapters, and cleverness is a huge part of that.
And not just traditional things, it's also about substitution or about like remixing. There's often, thinking about the ways we take traditional European dishes and spin them on their heads so that they're ours a new way. For sure. Yes, exactly. Yeah, macaroni and cheese.
Give me that sauce. Also, sorry, side note, because we are in a cold place, we in the South prefer our collards with frost on them. We wait until the first frost hits, and then the collards have a whole new flavor profile because it caramelizes all the sugars, right? It's even more sweet, it's even more tender. And so you have that opportunity here on new levels to get that frost.
Okay, so remind us, we need to do a website with all of the crops that are like better after the frost. Like, that's a project. I want that. I want that for here. We have some yeses. Okay.
Awesome. I wonder if we want to show a video now. Does that feel good? So it's going to come right now.
Down on it, you better miss that, cause that was seed water. And we put it down, we started to put it, you go down there and get that seed little back, and we cut it. You couldn't soak the seed, you could not soak the seed.
Wow.
You slide the EOP, you take a fork or something, you let those seeds down on a piece of newspaper or one piece of paper. Then you boil them. You could not put the seeds in your mouth.
That messes with what?
I don't know what it meant to it me, but I didn't have time to do it, but I had to. You can see that there, get sick on the egg.
Okay, got it.
Then you break the seeds out and ran out of the dry.
In the sun?
Yeah, ran out in the sun, they dry. Then run some seeds, just so they dry. When all the stuff dry, put it in the refrigerator, and put it something in the jar to make them up. That was watermelon seed for next year.
So beautiful. So that's about preservation from the start. It's also about knowing and not needing to know the science behind things. Right.
May I? So that was my great uncle Andrew. He is 76 now, and this is where my work really started. It was just spending time. I would put my phone on and I would just start recording, and I would engage and I would ask questions. And they kept an acre garden that fed everybody in our community, right? The wealth and the abundance that was available through the food that they were growing in that garden. It's like it said enough. Like, you don't need to have a doctorate in anything for me to understand that you know what you're doing, right? That you're rooted in this, and that this is a part of us, right? And so recording these like short oral histories, I shared this at my last supper, which I don't even know. Well, not this goat, but he cute. Hey. Oh, she. Hey, Ina. At some point, I believe there's some pictures from my last supper. Okay. And at those suppers, I usually try and mix in some different mediums. So my oral history or short films, things like that, so that people understand like what they're eating and why it's important, right? It's grown by Black farmers. I source my food from, we have a Black farmer CSA called Tall Grass Food Box in North Carolina. But it's another way for you to engage with the story and the importance, and the people who I feel really deserve like space to be called experts, right?
Yeah, and not just called it, but revered for the ways that they've been stewarding the land steward. And that's one of the things I was hoping to achieve in creating A Darker Wilderness, is to think about how the archive provides this evidence that we've been doing this for a long time. And that like we don't need to necessarily go to some master gardener to teach us how to do those things, but that some of it's about listening to each other, some of it's about listening to our environment, to the land.
Yeah, can I offer just a moment of encouragement on that? So I know that there are a lot of us that, you know, we're like, I'm just gonna try, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna try. And then as soon as we speak to our neighbors who are doing it already, or what our friends or whomever, they won't tell you what the right way to do it. Well, see, if you do it like this, and et cetera. Now, I'm just gonna share with you that every time I have listened to that advice against whatever my internal whatever barometer was telling me to do, it messed me up. You know, and it was shared with love, you know, but I was looking at a specific plot of land, a specific pot of soil, you know, a specific side of my house, and making decisions that felt right. And those decisions are often challenged, and I'm gonna say it, they're often challenged by people who don't look like me. And I'm like, well, you know, that shouldn't matter in the sense that we're growing in the soil. But for whatever reason, it does. It does. So my seeds that I grow with my hands, that does something specific. And I think that message is true for everybody. Like, your seeds do what you do with them in your place, you know? And we can share that, and we can create collective stories and have like a collective archive of what, like wouldn't it be so cool if you bought a property, bought some land, a little plot, and knew the history of like what did what there, what was there, you know, like archiving that space. And I feel like those stories and those archives are going to be more and more and more necessary as we, you know, kind of deal with the changing climate, as we continue to migrate more to the center, as things get colder. You know, people are going to be learning from the north as things shift, you know, and every place where there's an extreme climate, I think, and hurricanes and islands, you're gonna be learning from all of those places. But I think that the idea of archiving like a portrait of the land, that's something that I'm very interested in my artwork as well. Creating a portrait of a land, but like really understanding what is that story, you know, like what's the story of this space, what's the history of this space, and like, okay, like what can I bring to it, adapt from it, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the documentation component of an observation over time of a place is super valuable work, and I think it's something that it is valuable to yourself and to your relationship to that place, but also to folks who will come after you and the people after them. And I wonder about the what you think about the way that you're interacting with these domestic things, and what do you have to do to them to make them art? Is it like is it in the presentation? Is it in your positionality to it? Is it in the place that you put them? You know what I'm saying? I don't know. That's what I'm curious about, is like the documentation lives where, and then it's art because it's tied to a narrative, or it's art because it's made sacred in a certain way. It's a simple thing that's put in a place since when we say look at it. That makes sense?
Can I just say, I think that she's here tonight. I really have to give a shout out to Tia Simone Gardner. For me, somebody who helped me frame or reframe the work that I was doing as archive. I never identified the projects that I was doing, the research that I was doing, the photography, the exhibitions, the storytelling, the audio recordings of, relatives, and, I never thought of it as archive. I knew that I wanted to preserve histories. I knew that I wanted to preserve stories. But I thought that the idea of a narrative or a story was more welcome in art spaces. And it wasn't until working collaboratively with Tia Simone Gardner that I really started to understand, the space and place of archive in the work that I was doing. And for me, at that moment, it really did allow me to burst out of any kind of, restriction or confinement that I felt like an industry was trying to place on what I was making. And so I think it is about positionality. I think it is about how we frame and who we invite, right? Like we started working together in conjunction with my exhibition at MIA. And, you know, I remember the curator, Nicole Sukup, was like, you know, you can talk to anybody, you know? Who do you want to talk to? You can talk to anyone. I was like, anybody? You know, I could talk to anybody. Well, who do I really want to be in conversation with about this work? And that work was about nurturing, you know, Black communities. And so I wanted to talk to somebody who was doing that, and somebody who I could learn from too, and somebody who was working, like, you know, kind of in the same field, but from a different, you know, perspective, so that it could be a robust conversation. And so, you know, I think that it is about who you include in certain spaces, and making sure that that power and those voices are heard and that power is distributed.
Thank you. I wonder, so we're going to talk about some ways that you might suggest people starting in this space. But before we get to that, I wonder if I wonder about how isolated you feel 3.5 hours north. And I wonder about your relationship with rural spaces, particularly rural spaces in Minnesota. And I've, you know, just 2 years into my relationship with this little piece of land in central Minnesota, and navigating that has been, eye-opening. As someone who's lived here most of my life, and thought certain things about rural places and my relationship to it. And I wonder if connecting to North Carolina is part of that seeking community in a rural space, or if it's in addition to the ways that you're seeking community there.
Okay, y'all about to hear all of my, I'm a very specific kind of person, okay? Like, I don't feel isolation, you know? Generally, the moments that I have felt isolated have been at times where I lived in heavily populated places and still was not connected to community. The times where I lived in Harlem and, you know, was surrounded by Black people, people who looked like me, worked at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and I was like, I still feel separate. You know, when I felt moments in my life where I felt like I wasn't fully accepted, those are the times where I felt isolated. You know, so I don't need people in my, like, space to feel connected. I need to feel seen, heard, and understood. You know, and so that's why this works, because, like, it's like from the first conversation, we recognized that we understood each other, whether that was the dream space or the way that we communicate or our family dynamics, or, you know, there were some similarities there. So if I feel like I am understood, I'm good. So with that stated, yes, I moved, you know, I'm originally from Los Angeles. I've lived in New York. You know, my father's in Atlanta, you know, big cities, you know. Since I was a baby, since I was a child, I have always known that I wanted to be on a farm. Always. I hated toys, you know, I would go, hated them. And I didn't like people, and I didn't want to have any friends. I thought that it was work. I thought it was work to have friends. It was exhausting, but I did want to grow things, you know, and I did want to share. So I would always choreograph dances and then, like, present them to people. And I loved theater. Don't put me on a stage, okay? I know. So, you know, so there were ways in which I could share myself, you know, but I did feel like I like, when I'm with people, I like to give a lot of myself, and so that can't happen on a daily basis because I get really drained. But I can pour into the land, and I can pour into my tiny family, you know? And so we have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they are everything. They are everything. Gabrielle is best friends with my 4-year-old. Yeah, their birthdays are 1 day apart. They are the same human. And so, they are. And so, you know, it has been beautiful to create home and create these feelings of, like, rootedness, you know? Because I know that if my husband and I feel rooted, then they will feel secure and stable as well. And I think that that's important for both of us. And then the question about rural, you know, Minnesota, yeah, we're like, now listen, let me change this, because I was going to be like, yeah, we didn't have any Black people over there. But that is what it seemed like, except in the summer when people kind of come back and they do lake life. But my husband's work has a lot of folks. You know, it's a pretty diverse workplace. And I was like, oh, really? Can I come visit? You know, just out of curiosity. But no, we got exactly what we were looking for. We have 3 acres. It's surrounded by trees. There's a lake in the back, and we can create, you know, the rhythms that we want and kind of live in harmony with our personalities, with the very big personalities of our tiny people and with the personality of the land. And then we get to slowly find community within these spaces. And if that means that we go to Apex, North Carolina once a year, that's what we do.
I also think that it's about overcoming this idea of like the dichotomy between rural and urban, and that like we've assigned all these characteristics to urban places, that they're safer for Black people, and we know that that's not true.
Yeah, there's no police presence. I'm sorry, I just have to say, like, there's no police presence in the community. Like, you know, so any anxiety I would get, like, oh, am I going the speed limit when I see a police officer around? Like, let me just make sure I'm doing everything right, which makes me look suspect and usually gets me pulled over, you know? I don't have that daily anxiety because it's a small town. And everybody, they're like, oh, I've seen that face before. They live nearby. It's fine, you know. So we have been treated well, accepted. It's a tiny art community, but we're invited into it. You know, people compliment my clothes that my husband makes. You know, like things like that. Like there is community being built. Yeah.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I also think that my partner is my wife Zoe. Some of you know her. Is the convener of the Midwest Farmers of Color. I see Mr. Cheney's in the back over there. He's also part of that steering committee. And I think that there's something around this climate question, too, around who has expertise. And I know from knowing the farmers of color in Minnesota that they're actually doing real sustainable agricultural work as opposed to these big monocrop, huge farms that are growing corn. And so thinking about the ways where we go for expertise, who we're looking for expertise, who do we think knows that stuff? In Minnesota, most folks you'd ask, like, who's a farmer? Most folks would name, a white guy in his 60s or something. But that is not the only place to go for the kind of expertise that we need to survive in this time, right? In order to survive the ways in which the exploitation of our natural life is, getting to a point where things are, there's fires everywhere and flooding and drought and, we don't need to look to the person who's been deemed the expert because of whatever narratives we're living in. There are people who know how to do this stuff.
And Native and Indigenous people.
Exactly.
Like I'm right near White Earth Nation, and there's like the most delicious wild rice that you will ever have, so the knowledge is there, has been there, and, I'm willing to learn and observe.
I think it also, like, across the board in every field, like, that just makes sense. Who's with the land? Right. Like, who's been in relationship with the land? They're going to know, like, what's going on because they know, like, oh, I can smell the rain. I know that this tree is going to tell me what time it is, when it's time to plant what, this herb is going to heal the, they have a relationship, so they can tell us something from a vantage point that maybe someone else who is deemed an expert can't. Right. And I think that's so valuable.
So valuable. So I think some folks here came for the tidbits. Can we get into, like, how can we do this work?
Yes.
I didn't hear the thing you said.
Hit
it, get into it. Okay. Can we talk about what are a few things that we could do, experiment with our own projects, with our own garden, with our own kitchen, to sort of get into this intimate learning relationship with our food and element?
Well, I think what I've experienced is play it's vital. Like, I wouldn't try and tell you what you need to do in order to crack into land work. I think it's about being with a piece of land and understanding, like, what it's trying to tell you, and what you're also, like, when you're still enough, you know what to do, right? How to enter a field like this. I didn't talk to anybody about doing this work. I got still. And I heard what I needed to hear. And then I went into the relationships that I had that existed, to the people who I love, who are the experts in my community, who usually are the elders of a place. And they were the ones who were like telling me the stories about this person and that person, and where this was. And we used to harvest clay, red clay, and we used to eat this, and we used to, like, that's really where I started. And then from there, I kind of just started to play. Like, that's when the fun starts, because you're able to take those ingredients and those things that you now have a relationship to and figure it out for yourself. And that's really, like, what I've been doing,
Can you tell us about some of that play that you've been up to? Okay. Please. Or, Jovan, if you have something to add.
I can help with this. Listen, because I have all of the questions in the world for Gabrielle, because there's a lot of practices that you do that I haven't yet done, and I'm really excited to experiment with them. So one of the things that I think about, I won't say prepare for, but I have on my mind are like holidays in Black families, like we have our staple things of what we like to eat and make, and like that, a lot of that is rooted in Southern cooking, but we want it to be fresh and delicious and straight from the garden, but then it's snowy and it's winter and it's cold and the ground is already frozen come Thanksgiving, right? And so one of the things that I'm interested in this year is like definitely planning my growing season so that I have enough to save through the winter and preserve through the winter. But then, like, the how am I gonna preserve it? I told, like, listen, I have a honey-do list. I'm like, babe, can you please dig me a root cellar? Y'all laugh, but he was like, okay, So that is a maybe project unless Gabrielle can give me some other ideas. And we started talking about, like, preserving in salt and, like other things that I'm like, what? I'm curing things that I just forgot about. I just forgot, I'm still trying to get this garden going, and I'm like, oh yeah, you can do all of. So I think if you can share some of like your two favorite preservation, practices and like what you use it for, I personally would love that.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to dig deep. I think dehydrating collard greens has been really beautiful because pot liquor, do y'all know what pot liquor is? Yes. When I get a deep yes like that one.
I'm going to go with the no. I do not know what that is. You can look at me like that. I'm from LA. We didn't know pot liquor. What is that?
We're all learning together. Oh, you've had it. If you've had collard greens, you've had pot liquor, most likely. Okay. So pot liquor is the juice that cooks off the collards, right? Well, here's the thing. Our people, so my granddaddy, he still does this. When you start to feel a little in your throat, you make your greens. You put the bone in it, right? The salted pork bone, right? Which makes it bone broth, essentially. And then you cook your greens down and you pour off the juice and you drink that. And they would give that to children and adults alike would drink this. Well, he puts his in mason jars and puts it in the fridge now. Okay. Now, back in the day, I know vinegar was used, salt was used, things like that can be used to like further preserve your things. I was actually having a conversation with my partner earlier about like the reason some of these like traditional recipes are important to like keep as is, like someone has to archive these things as is. It's always fun to play, but we need to remember like a lot of the reasons they did things the way they did it, they were preserving it, right? They needed it to last longer. So if I leave this ingredient out, because I'm like, I think I'm gonna put brown sugar, and it's like that's cute, and Now it's not shelf stable. So I think like that's one of the things is dehydrating the collards so that I can make pot liquor tea. And I've been like drying the leaves, grinding it with clove, putting cinnamon, nutmeg, orange peel dehydrated, and just I'll have my little cup of tea with my greens. And that's when I don't, want to make a big pot of collards and do it the traditional way, which is also a way that I tap into, my heritage.
Can you tell them about your salt brine? So, okay, I did an online, I don't even know what time it is, but I did an online.
Do we have time for this? Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, just cut me off when we're done. I did a class with Gabrielle, I can't remember when it was, but.
One pot cooking.
The one pot cooking. So good. And my favorite part was when you brought out, because she was like, you can use anything with this and whatever's in the cabinet. But what she has in the cabinet is not what the rest of us have in the cabinet. Because, she's like, just a nice wine. But the wine that she got is what her Uncle Andrew, homemade wine, plum wine, whatever. I'm just like, listen, I had kombucha, so I'll put kombucha in mine.
Use what you have. That's the framework.
Was good.
Use what you have.
It was good, but but I was like, you said what you have, so this is what I have. And then, I was asking like, can I use cabbage? Because that's all the greens that and you're like, that'll be watery, but you should just like make sure you cook it down. But she brought out this. And correct me if I'm getting all the terms wrong, but it was like a salt brine. Like it was like a container, like imagine a yogurt container, and filled in it is the salt, dehydrated orange peel, like God knows what else, brilliance from the garden. And I was just like, what? Who has this? And like maybe a grandparent.
The
would
way
have
my
that.
sis affirms me, y'all. Thank you.
But it got my imagination.
Yeah, that's the purpose.
Percolating. Mm-hmm. So I used to love juicing, but I hated the waste. And so I stopped juicing. But after that, I was like, oh, I remember a time before kids where I used to have time to like make little like fritters or whatever, Yes. So, okay, but I don't have time for that no more. But what I do have time for is I can take, what comes off of the juicer, the pulp, and spread it and dehydrate it. And then I ground it down, and I have the most delicious seasoning. And there's there's orange, there's kale, there's lemon, and it's delicious, and I could put it on everything. But that did get me to thinking what can I do so that I waste less too? And it uses everything, which makes me feel more connected to my ancestors, to my histories, the ability to be clever and use everything, and waste
Absolutely.
not. That is our history and our heritage.
For sure. That made me think of the okra leaves. My great uncle was suckering the plants when we started our okra. Every year we grow at least 11 rows of okra. And this was actually this was my first time experiencing this process from seed to harvest. So we're out in the garden. He's like, we've got these beautiful plants that we've been nurturing and loving all, and we don't have irrigation. We depend on God in the sky, okay? And so we just pray that it's going to grow. And so we were out in the garden. The plants are looking beautiful. They've got these gorgeous, fat, healthy, shiny leaves. And he's cutting them off and walking down each row, and he's just chopping them as he goes. And I'm having a small panic attack watching him do this, because I'm like, why would you do this to this beautiful plant that we've loved on? So I just started collecting them. I was like, we're going to do something with these. We're going to make it decorative, something. I started doing some research. And it's a West African tradition to use okra leaves in certain soups and stews. And it's beautiful because when you ribbon it up and put it in your pot, not only are you using everything that you can use from the plant outside of the fiber, which, as you know, you can make fiber. That's another conversation, but okra fiber. So using the leaf, it just adds that beautiful thickening mucilage to the soup, right, that you get with the fruit. And then it has the bite of like a collard green. So, I mean, it's a summer collard, essentially.
You know, we could do this all day.
All right, so we could do this all day, but we are nearing the end of our time together. But we could ask them if they want to ask us things. So we have time for, I don't know, 1 or 2 questions. There's a microphone. If you wanted to raise your hand. Ooh, Michael Cheney has his hand up. Michael, can you wait for the microphone just behind you? Right over your shoulder. There you go.
Good day, Michael Cheney, Project Sweetie Pie. Are you guys familiar with Ujama Seeds? Are you a part of that collective? And would you share a little bit for the public that's not?
I'm not, so please share.
Well, so I am not a part of the collective, but I love the work that they're doing to preserve heritage seeds. And I've ordered seeds from them, and they have the things that you can't find, right? So I love them. They're
They'll
out
be here
of
in 2 weeks. They'll be here on the 11th, right, Michael? They'll be here as part of the Farmer of Color convening, and they'll be doing a project. You'll be doing a project with them for the next year, I think, right? So collecting seeds in our community and sharing and being able to send seeds to other communities that are doing seed saving.
Yes, thank you for bringing them up. I feel like collectives like that are just very important to our culture, right? Because they specifically preserve our heritage seeds and foodways. Like, that's all they do. So thank you for bringing them up. And I am a part of this heirloom collard organization, which they're also involved in that project to preserve heirloom collards, because there's over 80 types of heirloom collard greens. And so we got to preserve them all.
Awesome. Is there any other, Janata, do you have a question? Wait for the microphone.
Thanks, Sharkey. I was going to say, I feel like so much of the diaspora experience is sort of obviously stealing us from the continent, mixing us up, separating us, disconnecting us. And like you named earlier, like food is really where we do kind of find a language to converse. And, you know, we live in this diaspora where it's like, okay, we have people who, you know, grew up in LA, folks who have, you know, Mississippi origins, I know like Sharkey does, like my Caribbean heritage. And there's a lot of ways that my Black identity is that I grew up as a Black American, but also with Caribbean identity, and also learning that a lot of these borders are obviously white domination and white supremacy. So what menu would you make that was an anti-colonization almost flavor? I don't know, that question just kind of came in the middle of this question.
Love it.
Because to me, I do feel like so much of how I get to learn about Black folks is through the different foods that we make all over. And I feel like that connects us. So maybe it's not a menu, maybe it's thinking about this question of how are we all connected through the diaspora, particularly because we're so connected to the food, regardless of how we're colonized. Is that a question? Play with it.
Number one, I think watermelon rind pie is on the menu at some point. Maybe it's just a palate cleanser, even though it's not going to cleanse your palate at all. No, I love that way of like thinking though and playing with this, because it is what unites us. It is our common language, and there's so many ingredients that that we can come to the table and have our own like story of connection to, no matter if we're from the Caribbean or where we're from.
Tell me about the heritage pea you were mentioning earlier.
Oh, whippoorwill peas. Yes, it's Ujama. I should reach out to them and see if they probably have some whippoorwill peas. So a few years ago, my great Uncle Lynn was telling me about this pea that he remembered having in his childhood. He didn't have a name for it. He just remembered this pea. He said it was a speckled pea. And it was the creamiest, most delicious pea. I mean, the way he talked about it, I was like, okay, I gotta find this pea. I'm having a random conversation with an elder, and they bring up whippoorwill peas. And I started to do some research, and this is the pea. This is the spotted pea. So it is one of our field peas. It's one of our heritage peas. And I must agree with my great-great-uncle Lynn. It is creamy. It is delicious. It is prolific. It's one of those things that's also like art to look at. It's beautiful.
It's going in the garden.
It's going in the garden, and it should. And it's kind of hard to find the seeds.
Okay.
So the more of us that are growing them and sharing them, the better. That's how we keep those peas alive.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I love that.
maybe whippoorwill peas are on the menu too.
Jovan, do you have anything to add to the menu?
I'm just going to her house. But I will say this, like, there are things that I'm like in research mode about. Like, there are things that feel like staples to me, but I know, like, for example, like, I want access to like indigenous corn. Like, I want access to real corn, because cornbread is like, I need it in my life, and that needs to be on the menu too. But you did this beautiful beetroot. I mean, it looks beautiful, and I know a couple people in this room made it. I think Tia made it, and that might have been how I learned about it too. But there are, that there's just like really beautiful things that you can do with some of the like wheats and flours. You know what I mean? Like I know of a farmer in Maryland who's growing rice and sells flour and corn and things like that. And so I need to talk to him a little bit more about, like, tell me about this corn, And I'm okay with, like, everything is not going to happen in my backyard. But the source, I think, is really important, too, and, like, the ways in which those people are farming, will contribute long-term to our planet. And anyway, Purple Mountain Organics, I think is what it's called. So if you're looking for, like, a lot of different types of rice made by a Black person in the U.S., check them out. But yeah, so, certain rices and corn and things like that, I'm just really curious about. So I feel like I want it on the menu, but I don't know if it has a place there yet.
I think
Everything's on the menu.
I think a collaboration with indigenous chefs feels like the way to really do that dinner, and develop that menu.
Sure. One more question.
I am so grateful to be here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for traveling to come here. I just relocated from the South as well, so I'm really feeling this conversation. I really relocated to work with the Indigenous Food Labs with Sean Sherman and North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems. More to talk about after, but that's also a place where you can come and source regionally grown corn and rice and all that kinds of stuff. The question I have for you all is, for those, what pieces of advice can you give for those of us in the room, especially people of color, who are wanting to own land, how to get started in that process? Because I think that there's a lot of roadblocks. I know some for me that come up is, a lot of PTSD in terms of, and I'll also drop this in here, post-traumatic slave syndrome. So this concept of wanting to own land here, but then the generational trauma of it having constantly being taken from us, right? So there's that roadblock, which is heavy. But then also just the trust and the process of wanting to have land here that we can actually grow on for generations. I don't know, there's many parts to this question, but just to start, what can you add to that?
I hate to put you on the spot, but I feel like Erin has a lot of information here. I will share just, I've had the same questions. We bought a house that has some acreage, and with the intention to convert it into a homestead, it just so happened that it was already taxed as so, and so that was a little bit easier. But I am fully aware that I don't own this until my mortgage is paid. So there's still that. And then there's eminent domain. So there's, so there is that trauma, and we kind of like just move through it with like optimism. But I do think that there are some radical, activities, programs, policies that are being, manifested, and I feel like you have some inklings, or at least resources to point.
Yeah, so we're pretty early. I mean, we have paid off our land, which feels exciting. But we, 2 years ago, we moved on to a piece of land that had been stewarded for many years by a group of nuns, and then later by a couple that, a white couple that was wanting to retire from this work and had been doing some intentional work around whiteness in Minnesota. And so we entered into an arrangement with them where they allowed us to make a down payment and then pay them payments towards ownership. We were able to raise the money as we were living there and stewarding there. We also formed a cooperative. And so the cooperative actually owns the land instead of us as individuals, which protects the land. We want the land to be in Black stewardship forever, for as long as we can. And so being a cooperative rather than having the nonprofit own it was really the most responsible way to do that. And we're getting creative about how we're fundraising for it. So we were able to raise like $2.5 million, but mostly we had white folks who were reparations accomplices to our project do the hard labor of like the actual conversations with white folks who have for their entire lives had respite in rural places in Minnesota, who have the benefits of having an away and an up north, that have access to wealth privilege, who want to do something different with their money, but we don't want it to be equal to them having more access to us or all the special things that come when people give money, just like, oh, you get special things. We really want them to be in conversation with themselves and their own families and their own communities around what liberation could come from freeing themselves from the burden of wealth privilege. So as we're learning, we're trying to document, trying to share it as much as we can so that other folks can use our model. Interesting things around creating a cooperative and then giving folks opportunities to invest in our cooperative as a business, which is another way that we were able to fundraise. Most of the money of the over $2 million, I'd say 80% came from individual donations. So we have some work to do to teach the foundation world in Minnesota about the benefit of investing in groups that are stewarding land. So look for more from us, because that's one of the projects we'll be doing in the next few years, is figuring out how to share what we've been doing at Root Springs. Awesome. It is 6:10, and we are supposed to be done. So I think there's one person in the very back who has a question, and then that will be the very last one.
I thank y'all for being out there and talking about Black Americans. We don't get enough to talk about it. We are more to do what Caucasian people want us to do and how we want to do, or how we do it, than our own self and listening to ourselves. Because a lot of our people of color believe we don't have a religion or don't have a background because we were stolen from whatever and came here and melted down. And we do have one, we just can't talk it, we just can't say it, we just can't do it. I mean, we can, but then if we do it, they'll call us racist.
Have you had that experience where folks have questioned you're doing stuff as a Black person for Black people? I feel like for me it's been more of like, I can feel in my soul a rejoicing and like a connection, like feel that sort of zingy feeling when you feel like magnetized to something. And I think that folks who are rooted in love and, people that I want to be associated with are really celebrating the ways that we're refining those connections. And
definitely feel celebrated. I feel like something that's important for me to remember is like, I do this work for other people that look like me and that have had experiences like myself, right, marginalized folks, so that they'll see themselves in my work. And I think even though we don't have access to all the languages that were lost and all the cultural bits and pieces, I think this work, connecting to the recipes, connecting to the stories and the oral histories, that feels like a part of that language that we did lose. And it's nice to be able to to be in that and to move and rejoice in that. That is a part of
And,
Reclaim.
absolutely. And I do want to offer, it's not necessarily gratitude, but it more is like congratulations to y'all, to Great Northern Festival, for being willing to share your platform and power with voices and stories like these. We're not experts, we're not scientists, we're not, but we are in here, to practice and do the work and share those experiences as we go along and invite you into the journey. And, it does take organizations who have platforms to say, like, those stories are important, we're behind that, like, here's a space, go for it, to be open to allowing our voices to be elevated and prominent and centered. So I'm excited for the Great Northern, for their future, and for all of our stories, and I hope that we get to share them again.
Thanks for that really perfect ending to our
That was
conversation.
good.
Let's hear it for Jovan and Gabby. I just want to thank you both for this conversation. I feel like we have much more to talk about. The Great Northern Festival invites you to do more things and to be part of the Climate Solutions series, which continues tomorrow back in this room at 11 with a conversation called Combating Climate Change with Urban Forests, How Trees Can Save Our Cities. That's sponsored by Green Minneapolis, and you can be back here at 11. If you need, there's some folks who can talk to you about registration. You can hang out in this space for a little while longer if you'd like to. Another 15 minutes or so, and I think the cafe is open downstairs. You can learn more about Great Northern through their app, which you can find in an app store on your phone. I really appreciate you all being here. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your night. Be safe.